You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Awesome. So hello and welcome everybody watching from home to today's digital public program, Yiddish Humor During World War II with Professor Anna Shternshis. Anna is joining us from her daughter's bedroom in Toronto today, which explains the very colorful background that you see.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll appreciate Elmo and the bricks and the cheerful spirit. I think we could use a little bit of that, and it has much better internet than my office. So yeah.
Absolutely. We can all use a bit of levity right now. So Anna Shternshis holds the position of Al and Malka Green Professor of Yiddish Studies and Director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. She received her doctoral degree in Modern Languages and Literatures from Oxford in 2001. Anna is the author of Soviet and Kosher, Jewish Popular Culture in the Soviet Union, 1923 to 1939, and When Sonia Met Boris, an oral history of Jewish life under Stalin. She is the co-editor-in-chief of East European Jewish Affairs and the creator and director of the Grammy-nominated Yiddish Glory Project with artist Psoy Karalenko, an initiative that revived forgotten Yiddish music written during the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. She lectures widely around the world and is a frequent guest on radio and television shows worldwide. Her work on Yiddish Glory has been featured in print media, television, and radio in more than 40 countries, and she was honored with the Federation of Jewish Communities in Russia Fiddler on the Roof Award last year. And actually, the museum had initially planned to have Yiddish Glory perform at the end of this month, and unfortunately, due to the circumstances, we had to cancel the show, but we are very happy and honored to have Anna joining us virtually today for this very special lecture. So welcome, Anna.
Hi, Samantha, and hi, everyone. It's the first lecture I'm giving over internet, so super exciting. And thank you for joining us. I know that thinking about the past is sometimes the last thing on our mind, given that we all live through incredible historical circumstances right now. And I'm thinking about how all of us will have a story to tell about how COVID-19 started, what we did, what we didn't do, what we wish we did. And my talk today is about how people found funny side of things when they lived through historical events and they understood the magnitude of them as they lived through them. Just like we do today, there are tons of jokes about COVID-19 already and in so many languages around the world. And I think that talking about humor is something that is somehow always relevant, not just frivolous, but relevant. Well, the room where I speak from is a little frivolous, but the topic, I hope, will redeem the surroundings. So I thought that given that it's not just the COVID-19 we live through right now, but also Passover is coming up, I thought I would start with Soviet Yiddish humor that had to do that's addressed issues before World War II, but rather address the issue of Passover. So as you may have heard or read, Soviets attacked religion, and especially organized religion, very consistently. According to Marxist doctrine, religion and the state could not coexist and could not, and religion had no place in the new communist society. So there was an organized attack on all religions practiced in the Soviet Union, including Judaism. So how was religion attacked? The idea was that, people need to understand that the religion does not provide comfort for them, does not provide outlet for their emotions, does not make them better people, but instead oppress them and forces them to do things that don't benefit them economically, socially, and culturally. And the Soviets employed, or rather, were joined enthusiastically by a lot of people, philosophers, artists, historians, who wanted to help Soviets to convince people who lived in the Soviet Union that religion was not a good idea. So each religion was approached by people who came from that religious group originally. So for example, Jews, attack on Jewish customs and tradition was usually designed, or it was always designed by Jews themselves. So how was it done? each religious tradition, each religious holiday was subjected to specific explanation about how that should not practice and how each religious ritual actually hurts people. So I want to show you a few examples of that. Let's see how my PowerPoint does for you. And I want to talk about how Soviets first dealt with the holiday of Passover. Now, celebrating Passover is centuries-old tradition. People have done it in all sorts of difficult, impossible circumstances. And when the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917, most of the Jewish residents of the Russian Empire were what we would say today ultra-Orthodox Jews. So Passover is very central to their calendar and to their way of life. So a lot of people had separate sets of dishes. A lot of people were preparing for Seder. And of course, everyone was aware about what Haggadah is and what the story of Passover is. So people who were involved in anti-religious propaganda among Jews thought, well, that would be a really good idea to explain to Jews using the text that they already know how wrong and how harmful Passover is to their culture. So they wrote, they commissioned a book which appeared in 1923, was written by a philosopher, former yeshiva student. Later, he became a professor of Marxism and Leninism, named Moshe Belenki. And it was called, I showed you here the cover, it was called Haggadah for Believers and Apikorsim, for the non-believers or heretics. And the idea was to explain how every ritual of Passover that Jews celebrate actually hurts them or damages them or brainwashes them. Brainwash was a very favorite word that Soviet ideologues used. Haggadah was written fully in Yiddish. It was illustrated by some of the hottest, some of the most interesting artists of the time. Many of the illustrations were done, for example, by Alexander Tischler, who is an important Jewish avant-garde artist. And here you can see the cover of that first edition. And what you see is an old man looking a little scary, is doing the ritual of dikas hometz, like looking for the leaven and getting rid of it. And then the Haggadah went into detail explaining what actually dikas hometz is. So instead of just saying that you shouldn't look for leaven and for hometz in your land, you should actually, understand what that means. And it says hometz, looking for hometz and burning the hometz, is exactly what happened during the Russian Revolution. This is the quote that I put on screen, is from the second edition of the Red Haggadah that was published in 1927. As you can see here, the text says that 10 years ago, the working class of Russia got rid of all the hometz of the Soviet land. They cleaned away all the traces of bourgeois, landowners, and they took over the land from the capitalists and gave it to the working class and to peasants. Then you see that they play with this tradition of fire, burning the hometz, right, on the eve of Passover. And here there's also fire, but who gets burned in that fire is interesting, because these are the enemies of the Russian Revolution. And those of you who are familiar with Russian history will recognize some names in this hometz. Those of you who are familiar with Jewish history will recognize other names. But people who are reading this Haggadah in 1927 recognized all of these names for different reasons. So Kolchak, Yiddish, Wrangel, Denikin were, of course, generals of the White Army and notoriously famous for being especially cruel to Jews, for running a lot of anti-Jewish riots and pogroms during Russian Civil War. They were universally hated among the Jews during this time. So a lot of people had zero trouble seeing those people burned, right, in the flame of revolution. Then, of course, there's the name of Pilsudski, a leader of Poland, who was generally considered at that time a friend of Jewish population in Poland, but was very anti-Soviet. So they burned him together with Wrangel and Kolchak, who are famous for their anti-Semitism. Then we see names like Dan Martov and Abramovich. These are Jewish politicians, some of them leaders of the Jewish Bund, others are leaders of the Menshevik fraction of the Socialist Party. So in other words, some of them are charismatic, popular Jewish leaders who were anti-Soviet, and others are known anti-Semites. So the idea was to bring all these people together and to show Soviet Jews that even if a politician or a leader seems like a friend of Jewish people, if they're not friend of Russian Revolution, they should be burned in the flame of revolution. Today, it's a little chilling to read those words because, we know what would happen just, less than 20 years, 15 to 18 years after this Haggadah was written, that a lot of Jews would actually be burned. And looking into this text and thinking how Yiddish text actually calls for burning of Jews who were disagreeing with the Soviet regime is chilling. But at that time, it was meant as a parody to a Jewish ritual that enslaves people. And people who are used to celebrating Passover, they are very appreciative of this humor. Think about, any Passover Haggadah is the text that is so receptive to interpret contemporary interpretation. People always think about what's relevant today. We spend every year during Seder talking about what does freedom mean today? What does, each ritual of the Haggadah mean today? And for people who are aware of Passover, not necessarily celebrating Passover, but at least aware of it, this stuff is hilarious because they recognize the form, but they see very different content. I also want to show you a little bit of illustrations of this. This is the illustration by Alexander Tischler, this artist, close friend of Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall was also asked to contribute in drawing that Haggadah, but unfortunately that text was lost, so we don't know how Marc Chagall would have interpreted this, and I don't think he would have wanted his name to be associated with this document. But you see here, this is like the burning chomets, how they take, some people on the right or on the left, depending how you see the screen, are pushing into the ovens, the enemies of the revolution. Then I thought, it would be relevant to talk about how they dealt with urchats, the hand washing. Hand washing is in our mind today a lot, and I'm sure that will be discussed during Passover of 2020. So this is their talk of hand washing. Wash off the bourgeois dirt, the mold of generation, and say no blessing but a curse. As you know, during Passover, you don't say a blessing when you wash hands, you say nothing because, there's so much talking. No, sorry, it's not my super rabbinical interpretation of that. But anyway, here they're dealing with this ritual as well. And they use an opportunity to say that washing off means wash off the mold of generation. And then also calling for elimination of people and institutions that ensured that Passover would be celebrated forever. Rabbis, yeshivas that were outlawed, by the way, in the Soviet Union in 1921, heders, the Jewish primary schools that were outlawed a little bit later. But here's a strong criticism of these institutions. Every song of Passover Seder was changed in order to incorporate some new realities. And very often during Passover, they would do kind of alternative Passovers in a workers' club or in a library. They would stage something called Red Seder, where young students studying Jewish literature, studying Marxism or studying history, were sent to do some field work or field organizations in small towns where Jews lived, and their job was to organize seders for red seders for the people who wanted to. For the people who lived there. So sometimes they would stage those anti-religious seders and do them as kind of parody to traditional ones. So traditional songs of the Seder, such as Dayenu, like if only God has done this enough for us, that would have been enough. If only God has done that for us, that would have been enough, was changed as if it is performed by villains, people who are against the Soviet regime and who are saying, well, if only Bolsheviks came but would let us trade, we would have still succeeded. If only Bolsheviks came but would let us, do these things, we would still be successful. So in Yiddish, as those of you who can read it, see that the word "Seben Bolshevikas wollten kommen und wohl gar nicht zu genommen, wohl gewinnen, wer zu uns nur dainu. Wenn sie wollten ja genommen, nur sie gewollten losen handeln, wollten mir als zurückbekommen und es wohl gewinnt uns dainu. I could have sang it for you, but I will spare you the pain of that. Elmo is enough here. But as you could see from the written, it rhymes exactly to the tune of Dayenu, but it puts a completely different meaning. And as a result, people start laughing. I don't see your faces, I just see Samantha here. But I'm sure those of you who are listening to this, seeing this text for the first time, maybe are chuckling because we don't expect to see all these Bolsheviks and all this trade in a communist Haggadah. We don't expect to have a communist Haggadah to start with in the first place. So we find it funny. And this is how parody works. We recognize the frame, but we start laughing at the content because it surprises us. Now, when I was working on this material and all that stuff is published and is readily available in, well, at that time in Russian National Library, it was called Lenin's Library when I was working on it, I was very interested in how people who actually attended those seders reacted to this kind of stuff. Did they find it offensive? Did they find it repulsive? Did they find it funny? Was kind of generational kind of attitude to this? Did older people maybe found it offensive and younger people found it funny? So the published documents give us a sense of what people found relevant, but does not give us a sense of what they found funny or offensive. So I have, conducted some oral history interviews with people born in the 20s and a little bit earlier. And I did this work before in the 1990s. So some of those people were still around and asked them about this. I'm going to show you some more of the pictures from the Red Haggadah. And then I have a picture of me a long time ago interviewing people in, I think this group was in Moscow in 1998, asking them about their life in Soviet Russia at the time. So because I interviewed 454 people born before 1928, I was able to find some activists, including a person who was in charge of conducting that Red Seder in 1929. So he was born in 1903, I think. His name was Yakov Leshinsky. He actually interviewed him in Brooklyn. He told me that he was then a student in Moscow, university, in this department of Jewish studies that briefly existed there. So for the summer, they were sent to Shtetl to conduct a Red Seder. And I think at the time of the interview, Yaakov was, I want to say, close to like maybe 95 years old, something like that. So, but he was walking and talking and everything, and I think he was maybe 5 feet tall. And he said to me, "You have to understand, like at that time, I was young, I was tall, I was handsome. People really wanted to learn from me." And I said, "Were they offended, or how did it go?" He says, "Are you kidding? Everyone was so curious how these young students from Moscow came to the small town and conducted this amazing Seder." And a lot of, and he remembered some of the interpretations, but the funny part about his story was that once he stopped with the official conduction of the Seder, somebody approached him from the audience, said, "You did such a beautiful job, we're so happy, but why don't you come over to our house where we're going to celebrate real Seder and we will be honored to have you as our guest." So sure enough, he went for the meal in that house, and that's where he met his wife, and they were married soon after, and I met her as well, so she corroborated that story as well. So the idea of celebrating, kind of doing anti-religious ritual, combining it with a religious ritual itself, did not seem super contradictory to some people in the 1920s, not just Jews, so people were trying to make sense of all this new ideology and were kind of working their way through it. So in the spirit of combining things like religious rituals and Soviet ideology, I want to show you another example of what I was able to record also in Brooklyn, New York, from a man named Yefim Gorelik. His son wrote together with his dad, Yefim Gorelik, a book about his dad called Chaim on a Horse. And it's published online in Russian, anyone can find it. And Yefim Gorelik grew up in Parody in Belarus. And I have to say, I just came back from Belarus where I was talking about Jewish humor, and I showed that song. And it was really special to think about how like Belarus is still there. There's still Jews there. And the song is like this place, Parody is a real place. It's not just some imaginary Jewish geography. So anyway, so Yefim Gorelik remembered that his dad was a militant apikoiros. So, you know, he was an official kind of anti-religious activist whose job was to identify religious observances and stop them in Parody. But it didn't pay very well. So on the side, he also worked as a zetzer in the matzah bakery in the evenings, you know, helping to make matzah for people, you know, who was persecuted. So Yefim remembered a song from his childhood, which he sang for me. So I'm going to play to you that field recording from 1998. It was done on cassette tape. So, you know, I don't know if everyone knows what they are, but that kind of cutting edge of that technology. But you can hear his voice and the song that he sang for me. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what happened, with that song later.
WWII sager, hey, hey, won't you be love that your geese from that kid sail was the says batay, hey, there is Karl Marx and Marx is einer, nicht keiner. WWII sager, hey, hey, won't you be love that your geese from that kid sail was the sweet batay, Swiss liegen Trotsky und there is Karl Marx und Marx is einer.
I don't know, could you hear, Samantha, a little bit of that?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Oh, good. So, you know, you heard Marx is einer, mehr nicht keiner, and then it goes on with Lenin Trotsky and all this. So Yefim remembered that song from his childhood. It's one of those kids' songs that everyone was singing on May 1st, you know, celebrating the Labor Day, Russian Labor Day. And when he immigrated to the United States, I think it was in 1987, he was invited in one of those community seders where he heard that song as a counting song that people sing during Passover. And he said, well, what is this rabbi doing singing that song from my childhood, the communist song about Karl Marx during Passover Seder? And that's how he learned, and the rabbi too, that a song like this existed. And actually it was not, Yefim never thought of it as a Passover song before he learned that it was a parody. So the kind of new life, new ideology was entered and used the older forms in order to make sense to people. So all that is before World War II, and I'm realizing that I have like 10 minutes to tell you about the war. But one thing that I want to say about this is that, you know, although Soviet Yiddish kind of parody and all these materials were created in the 20s and 30s so long ago, I was still able to find people who remembered this material somewhat. You know, they were able to remember the song, or they remembered the fact that the Red Seder existed, something like this. It survived, bits and pieces. When it came to talking about World War II, oral histories were very rich in very different facts. You know, Soviet Jews lived through three most important experiences during World War II. Some ended up under the German or Romanian occupation. So of 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust, 2.4 million lived in the Soviet borders at that time. Another 500,000 served in the Red Army. And yet another 1.4 million survived the war in the Soviet Central Asia, Siberia, and Ural Mountains. Also 250,000 Polish Jews ended up there as well. So there's a lot of information about the war in oral histories. People remembered a lot of details about them. But, I was interested in music as well, and not just their stories. And I asked them about that. And the uniform answer that I got about music in Yiddish during the war, especially humorous music, was that it didn't exist. It didn't exist because during the war, Yiddish public culture kind of was not on their radar. So even people like Yefim Gorelik, who remembered dozens of songs, such rare songs as the one I showed you from the 20s, was able to sing them a lot, was able to sing stuff from the 60s. From the war, he says, we only had Russian music. And that was more or less consistent information. And that's why I was super surprised and shocked even when I came across these documents in the manuscript department of the Vernadsky Library in Ukraine with hundreds of songs and jokes written in Yiddish, collected in Yiddish during World War II, immediately thereafter, by the workers, the scientists who worked at the Kiev Cabinet for Studies of Jewish Culture, which is a small department of the Ukrainian Academy of Science. And during the war, between 1944 and 1947, people who worked there, including linguist Yali Spivak, whose photo you see on the picture, and especially ethnomusicologist and folklorist Moisei Beregovsky, who you see here as well as his colleagues, Ruvim Lerner, also linguist, spent the entire World War II collecting Yiddish songs, jokes, and stories from Jews who lived through all sorts of experiences during the war as the war unfolded. They themselves were in Central Asia or in Ufa, which is a region in east, 800 kilometers east of Moscow, about 1,200 kilometers east of Kiev. And they encountered songs and stories from refugees and evacuees and, Red Army soldiers. And all that stuff was in that archive, which was discovered in the manuscript department of the Ukraine National Library only in the 1990s, because right after the war, Beregovsky and Lerner and Spivak were arrested in accusation of Jewish nationalism. That's the reason, by the way, that the only picture of Ruvim Lerner that I have, the one that I see, is the mugshot taken by the Soviet police when he was sent to jail, and in 1951. So anyway, so they collected hundreds of songs and stories in Yiddish. And one of the, and this is like, they were also working on a book that was, you see this beautiful sexy cover of that book, scheduled to come out in 1949, and creativity, so folklore of Soviet Jews. And one of the most shocking things for me was when I was working with this material is that about 25% of stuff there have to do with Jewish humor. This was satirical, this was laughing, this was making fun. There was a lot of historical chronicle, there was a lot of different things, but there was a lot of humor. And I gave like a lot of talks about this material. I'm writing, I'm thinking about this all the time. But the idea, and I even wrote like 2 articles about Jewish humor from this material. But I have to say, until like we're going for this COVID-19 situation and thinking about, I don't know, like thinking about what we want to watch and what we want to hear and what we want to say, somehow humor tops our list, right? Like, once we deal with all the news that come, depressing news, sad news, devastating news, and, even more devastating kind of thinking about the future, more we crave humor. Both humor about what's going on and also humor that distracts us from what's going on. And this is what I have here for you. I have humorous pieces that help Soviet Jews to make sense and cope with the war. The thing about that, however, is that the governments, especially totalitarian governments, but not only them, are less interested in fostering humor among the population as they go for the war. They're much more interested in using humor as a weapon. So how can we like ridicule the enemy more so that soldiers fight better, or workers in the home front work better? So instead of kind of supporting humor, in general, they end up actually censoring humor, because people cannot be forced to laugh at certain things, especially things that they don't find funny. So because the project of collecting Soviet humor was done through the Soviet organization for the Ukrainian Academy of Science, of course, Beregovsky and Lerner and colleagues could not record everything that they heard. And people were cautious about telling them jokes that they thought might get them in trouble. After all, a famous joke of 1937 was that Joseph Stalin was so fond of jokers that he created a whole gulag full of them, because people went to jail for telling an anti-Soviet joke. So none of that changed during the war. So what we have recorded here are songs that both Beregovsky and his colleagues thought would be okay, would be appropriate for the Soviet audience to hear and for the Soviet ideologues to pass as Soviet, and also what people believed would be okay to sing to the collectors of this material. So what did they find funny? So one of the things they're laughing about, and they're laughing very strongly about, is how incompetent German soldiers are. There are a lot of songs ridiculing how German soldiers, they go for they try to fight and their pants are falling down, or they're shitting their pants from fear, and describing them in very unflattering light. So for example, this song recorded in 1944 in Uzbekistan talks about how the German soldiers are so incompetent. I thought I would bring you some pictures, sorry, but maybe it will come later. But it generally fits with this kind of Soviet idea of ridiculing Hitler, ridiculing German soldiers. One thing I want to say about this is that they laugh very well at German soldiers. What they don't laugh at all is at Soviet soldiers. And you could tell me, like, why should they laugh at Soviet soldiers? Soviet soldiers are saving them from fascism. But the thing is, people laugh about everything. And the Jewish soldiers, why are they laughing at everything but not themselves? That doesn't fit in the long Yiddish tradition of self-deprecation, including the soldiers. Like, think about Itzik Manger's famous song Yosel Ber, talking about Yosel Ber, who serves in the army, and he's so incompetent that he can't even use his broom properly, let alone a gun. And there are tons of songs like this in Yiddish from World War I, zero from World War II. Soviet soldiers in Yiddish don't laugh at themselves. And that doesn't make sense, especially when we look at the ghetto jokes collected, for example, by Simon Huberband in Warsaw Ghetto, where jokes like this one, how if you see a plane, how do you know if it's a British plane, German plane, or a Russian plane? And you know if it's a Russian plane if a pilot has no shoes. So a pilot is barefoot. So what is this little joke laughing at? It's laughing at how few resources the Red Army has. So what, Soviet soldiers don't see it and don't laugh at it? It doesn't make sense. I'm sure those jokes existed, but they could not be recorded in the context of the Soviet project like that. Mm-hmm. So what could they record? So I want to show you an example of kind of less scripted joke collected by Herschel Blostein, who was an enthusiast journalist who spent the war in Kazakhstan, who wrote famously in 1943 that this year will be remembered as the year when Jewish humor flourished. I let you think about that for a second. And he based his observation on songs like this one. For example, this a song recorded from Shira Perlina in Lithuania, in Kazakhstan. I'm going to let you listen, or maybe not see very well because it's a small thing, how Psoy Korolenko, an artist who I work with on this project and bringing the songs back to life, sings that song.
Adolf Hitler, Bräuner, Homen, Svarta Vira, Grober Stick, Dieren Boyen, ab dein Nomen, a Klaset, Koran, Antik, zu der Gure, Welt, die Freien, unser Stalin, unser Glück, und ein Rachter seit Indien, Hitler fliegt.
Yeah, so the idea is that Adolf Hitler is compared with Haman, was universal through Yiddish-speaking or Jewish Europe and even the world at that time. In fact, the word Hitler and Haman were used interchangeably both in Polish ghettos and in the Soviet Union and in the United States. Hitler himself used the imagery of Purim in one of his speeches, but that's a whole different story. But the point is that these are Jews stuck in the Soviet Union. Some of them may be Polish or born in, relatively recent Soviet territories, but they were not celebrating Purim for 25 years already. So because Purim was attacked, just like Passover was at the time, and suddenly it all comes back because this is a framework that helps people make sense of atrocities that they hear about, that they witness. And one other thing about this humor is it's incredibly cruel and graphic. This is a continuation of this song. It talks about how exactly they're going to kill these Germans, how exactly they're going to kill the fascists who are attacking their land. Now, Blaustein worked with Jews in Poland, with Polish Jews in Kazakhstan, and the songs that he recorded, they're kind of like that. Or there's a joke about Hitler pretending to be a Jew and putting on a beard and stuff like this. I already don't have time to show you, but maybe somehow I can share this PowerPoint later and you can see for yourself.
Anna, you can take the extra time to show us some pictures. We're not constrained by time so much. So
because it's a virtual lecture, I forget all that stuff. Log out if they get bored with that. So, okay, fine. So, the jokes and songs that he was recording from those Polish Jews, they kind of fit into this pattern of criticizing fascism, criticizing Hitler, and ridiculing them from all sorts of things. So, I'll show you some pictures of Jews in Kazakhstan. And I do want to say that of about 300,000 Polish Jews that survived the war, 250,000 survived in the Soviet Union. And Blaustein was recording both, their stories and songs and also those of Soviet Jews. So this is the song that I want to show you next, is called A Beard. Actually, it's a joke. It's not a song, but you'll see it in the musical performance. It's a taste of what we missed from the Volksbühne Museum of Jewish Heritage that we were going to do in New York, actually in about 5 days, right, Samantha?
Yep.
Yeah, and you will see that this is a joke that Blaustein recorded in 1943 and how exactly it makes fun of Hitler. And again, Psoy Korolenko together with Loiko Band.
A Witz mit Bord. Als Hitler der Senf sein Geschäft ist kaputt. Und sich zugeklebt an Bord. Und mit uns Jiddish. Sich der Bus Pagebelsen, Bus ist noch geblieben, a lebendiger Jid und Tretjemu Reichu. Und gekommen zu ihm. Mit Bruder, Hitlers Menschen, jucken sich nach mir. Dem Jid bald geworden подозрительный der ganze Zapach. Hat der Jid nicht gehört dort, als Jid soll sorgen von Hitlers wirkliches Mensch. Chayes, Свинякes, Собакes, Paskudniakes, aber Menschen schon hodne, aber nicht kein Mensch. Der Jid ist gewähnt Durak. То sagt zu Hitler und так. Ведь это Феттер, я и сам иду шныряю по углам, и поэтому торцу меня не видно по лицу. Койдем кол, музыка и хороп немен дебор, у неберлозен noch штикалах вальцес. И пока тот думал, что ответить, вот der Jid erstreckt um die Hand die Bord. Ну-ка-ся! Bei Hitler haben genommen die Zitterhand und fies. И это его видало. Sagt der Jid, ich hab gesehen Ziegen mit Bert. Nee, es ist natürlich. Ob что и на viele gesehen Beck mit Bert, это польский политик, который поддерживал Гитлера, mit jüdischer Bert in die Höhe. Aber ein jüdischer Wort auf ein hintischer Morde? Мы такого не слышали. Und der Witz endet sich mit der Gramm. Борода, не борода, дело не в бороде. Ваше место сам знаешь куда или где. Jo Bord mit Bord, du geht nicht in kein Bett. Dein einziger Ort ist in Dreck.
Yeah. So as you could see from the words of that songs, as jokes, which is so and the trio Loiko put it to music like that. It talks a lot about Hitler and his lack of success, but it doesn't mention one thing, and that is Soviet Union. That joke could be told in a ghetto, that joke could be told in a camp, that joke could be told in the United States of America. The universalism of laughing at Hitler pretending to be a Jew and a Jew outsmarting Hitler, that was the staple humor of that time and immediately after the war as well. So one of the things that struck me as kind of noteworthy in the Blostein collection is that the best jokes were either about Jews not mentioning the Soviet Union or about Soviet Union not mentioning Jews at all, laughing at incompetence of German generals or talking about the Soviet success in on the front, liberating Europe and that kind of stuff. So, which doesn't tell us much. It kind of leaves an interesting gap about where's the Soviet Jewish experience that reflected in humor probably was not ideologically appropriate for Blostein to record at that time. But nevertheless, those two things show us what was relevant to Soviet Jews and to Polish Jews at the time. And I do want to say this, that Polish Jews who survived the war in Kazakhstan and other parts of the Soviet Union, many of them wrote memoirs, including, for example, a Polish Yiddish writer who later became also an artist, another friend of Marc Chagall, Mendelman, who wrote many books about his Soviet experience, including the one in there. And one of the biggest sentiments that he talked about was that they didn't know who to be more scared of. Soviet secret police who would come and arrest them for doing something anti-Soviet, because a lot of those Polish Jews were arrested by the Soviet government and deported to Kazakhstan in 1939 and 40. And they were just released from jail in 1941. So they didn't know whether they should be worried about that or they should be more worried about Nazis and German fascism. And this dichotomy, like who is the bigger enemy and how to make sense of it, relevant in 1942 and 1943, is really prominent in memoirs. None of that ends up in the materials collected by Beregovsky, which tells us once again that the songs and the humor that we're reading is officially sanctioned. Something that maybe some people found funny. It does, if it's official, it doesn't mean that nobody thought it was funny. But definitely something that seemed appropriate to record and to preserve. And interestingly, none of that official stuff survived in popular memory. But unofficial Soviet humor, including the ones that ridiculed Soviet black market, ridiculed corruption, even ridiculed the lack of resources of the Red Army, survived in the Russian language. And that exists, and in a lot of collections as well. And Jews are part of that humor. And there is not a single joke that I was able to find that presents Jews as in a positive light. In other words, there are no Jewish heroes. There are no Jewish soldiers. There are no oh, sorry. I was trying to unshare my screen and then I got into trouble. There is no, just a second. Sorry, Samantha, you asked me to unshare my screen and I'm having trouble doing, oh, stop share. Here we go. Thank you. Sorry about this. There are no positive images of Jews. If there are any jokes about Jews during the war in Russian or Ukrainian, they are, well, I don't use this word lightly or a lot, but they're more or less what we call today anti-Semitic jokes. For example, Jews are making huge success on Tashkent front. What does it mean? That Jews are not fighting the war, they're sitting out the war in Tashkent. Or a joke, that two soldiers see uncover Babi Yar and see the site of massacre of Jews where 33,379 Jews were killed in 1941. So they go, across those bodies and they say, hey, Mikola, look at what they've done to their kikes. And Mikola says, don't worry, when we get to Berlin, we'll show their kikes. So these are the jokes that exist in Russian, in Ukrainian. They exist at the same time as the jokes that I showed you. The jokes like this exist in Yiddish, I'm sure. I'm sure there was a lot of, not anti-Semitic jokes, but jokes that ridicule things that didn't seem relevant or appropriate for recording by Soviet scholars. So what does it tell us? It tells us that we don't get kind of, people like to see, we like to get into heart of the people, into soul of the people, because what they laugh at is what's relevant. We don't get that from this material. But what we do get is we get what Jews surviving the war in Kazakhstan or fighting the Red Army thought it was relevant. There's also a whole section of things, if you want to ask about this in Q&A, I can talk about this humor created in the ghettos, like under Romanian occupation. There's some of that as well, and that's also really interesting, and also doesn't quite fit with the Soviet narrative. But I think one of the windows that this material does open for us is to not to find what people found funny, but to find what people found relevant. And they deserve that, us caring what they found relevant. And also, in some ways, it gives us a sense of what scholars can do for ensuring the continuity of Jewish culture. Because even Soviet scholars working in the conditions of the Soviet ideology with huge ideological restrictions and with huge, shortage of resources, managed to record materials that did not survive in popular memory. And that gives us a sense of, without this material, we would not have known what people found relevant, people who didn't live to the end of the Soviet Union, who didn't live to the time when they could actually tell the story, like the oral history project participants that I interviewed and Shoah Foundation interviewed. But it gave us a sense, it gave us materials that allow us to understand their culture better and also understand what scholars could do and where their role is in ensuring the continuity of Jewish life and culture. So on this high note, maybe a little bit cheesy note, but nevertheless, the times call for a little bit of optimism and cheesiness, I think. I would like to finish and thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was phenomenal. And it was great hearing you talk about it in person, because I did read your book, Soviet and Kosher, and I remember reading about the Red Haggadah, which to me is fascinating. And I'm curious, while we wait for people to write in with questions of their own, I'm curious about the Red Haggadah specifically, and if you know, if it exists to this day in any shape or form, are there any descendants of that Red Haggadah, so to speak, or if there are any examples of other themed Haggadahs and seders throughout history?
Right. So thank you for that. So the Red Haggadah text was published, I think, with circulation first 3,000 and then 10,000. And most of it, I don't think exists, but the Harvard Library has a copy. Russian National Library also has a copy. And also, there are all sorts of Yiddish language Soviet Aggadot from the time. They were published in not such a fancy format. That one is a real Haggadah. You can take it and you can change for pages and all that. But there were published this kind of leaflets, and there was a newspaper, actually a few newspapers called Apikoiros, published a heretic, published in Yiddish in Bobruisk and in other parts of the Soviet Union. So every Passover they would publish a variation of Red Haggadah, sometimes more funny, sometimes more serious, sometimes more academic. The one I showed you was perhaps the most academic of all of them, because it like really attacked all the rituals like from a historical perspective. But there are tons of those kind of things. And of course, they fit nicely into the whole genre of radical Haggadot, starting from, I don't know, I want to say starting, but including Kibbutz Haggadah and Workman's Circle Haggadah or Jonathan Safran Foer Haggadah. The only difference that Soviet Haggadah has compared to all these others is that that is designed to be the last Haggadah that people ever see, because celebrating, Passover according to that narrative, according to that text, should convince people to never do this again and to switch to another holiday. Whereas all other Haggadot keep bringing up the relevance of Passover, whereas Soviet Haggadah does not allow for that.
Great, thank you. We're still waiting for people to write in, but you mentioned about humor in the ghettos. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit more.
So we have from ghettos, there are two ways that we have this information about humor and about songs in general. One is when people were writing things up as they were in ghettos, and sometimes not knowing when they're going to come out, or knowing that they'll never come out. And they wrote little scribbles on pieces of paper, which they threw out of the fences of ghetto. And this was songs. Sometimes there were short notes and stuff like that. And most of those are not humors. But after the war, after the liberation of those areas of Ukraine, Beregovsky and his team came back to Ukraine, and they went to places like Tulchin and Bratslav and Chernovitz and Bershad, and with places with a lot of ghettos. And they, in 1944, and they were looking for survivors who sometimes sang songs for them, including humorous ones. Usually, people were trying to hide the fact that they survived the war under the German occupation, because Soviets persecuted them for that later. It's a whole different story. But they were able to record songs and jokes from children who are, as you know, notoriously famous for not being able to keep secrets. So some of the humorous songs from children from ghettos are parodies to, say, a famous wedding song where a groom accidentally marries his mother-in-law. It's called the Naya Hasana. So in that song, the humorous one of Ghetto, Hitler accidentally marries Katyusha. Now, Katyusha is a rocket, but it's also a name for a woman's name in Russian. So the pun here is that Hitler marries a rocket that eventually kills him right during the wedding. So stuff like that. So again, I'm sure there were songs and jokes that were less politically correct for the time, but they did not end up on paper because Beregovsky and his team didn't want to jeopardize the any future for these children who were singing the songs for them. So, but these are the examples that I have.
Thank you. And my next question actually relates to those politically incorrect jokes. So of course, you couldn't find any of them for the reasons that you just mentioned in the archives, but I'm wondering, in your interviews with individuals who had lived through this period, did they disclose any of those, non-PC jokes to you, or was it still not a thing?
In Russian, for sure. In Russian, for sure. They had but they had nothing to do with Jewish experiences. Uh-huh. There was a lot of jokes about, about a Red Army, about the false reporting that reports success of the Red Army, but actually it's failing everywhere. There are a lot of jokes about officers being unjust. There are a lot of jokes about Jews being persecuted and not receiving the order and medals that they deserve and stuff like that. But there is nothing in Yiddish. And it's interesting because like it doesn't make any sense that they forgot. People say, oh, that's why you should now use oral history because people forget. Well, so how is it possible that they don't forget from 20s and 30s? They don't forget from 50s and 60s, but they do forget from the war. To me, that's a sign that people who probably circulated these jokes and enjoyed them did not live to see the end of the war, or the memory of the war, a memory of hardship, the memory of overcoming those hardships, of losses, overcame the memory of humor. I mean, people did not think that was important to tell because there is an agency in people choosing to tell their story and choosing what's important and what they want to tell me as a person who they perceive as, recording it for history, and I am. So they don't want to tell these jokes. They want to tell other things. But like stuff about the war, before the war, like there's this famous joke about what's the difference between kolchoz and kol nidre. So kolchoz is a collective farm and kol nidre is kol nidre. And the answer is that in kol nidre, we fast one day, and for kolchoz, we fast the entire year. So stuff like this. So how does that survive? And anything about the war doesn't. So there is something here about secrets and silences that have to be looked for. And to me, the silences often tell more actually than the materials that I do record.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. We've just about run out of time. This was phenomenal. And, thank you for agreeing to do it digitally. I know it's new for you as it is for me and a lot of people. But this was really, really fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
You're quite welcome. And for those of you watching, make sure to check out some of Anna's writings, Soviet and Kosher. I can highly recommend if you're interested in learning more about Red Haggadah and more about Yiddish humor, definitely look that up.
And the Yiddish Glory CD, perhaps, right, with all these materials.
Yes, Yiddish Glory. There is a lot out there to see on YouTube. And hopefully when this is all over, we can arrange to have you guys come to New York and do a proper in-person concert as we had all been looking forward to.
Alibi.
Thank you so much. All right, Anna. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.